you will accept my condolences as we are going through the month of Muharram. I mentioned this almost every night that I was speaking in San Antonio. I said this almost every night, that we truly have to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are given the chance and the opportunity to come back to the majlis of Aba Abdullah. Don't ever underestimate this. Don't ever think that it's something that will just happen every year. Don't think that it's something cultural that we do every year and it passes by. Every single one of us who's sitting here in the majlis of Aba Abdullah has been given permission from Aba Abdullah to come and sit here and mourn for him. Okay? Just so you understand this better, let us take a moment, close your eyes maybe, and think of all the wrong things that you have done from last Muharram up until this Muharram, and then think of the grace, the kindness, the mercy of Aba Abdullah, that again, when the month of Muharram comes, it's as if he knocks on your door again, and he says, you know what, it's okay, I know you did all of those things, but it's okay, you can come back to my majlis again. Hopefully this time you'll change. Right? Now, how many of us actually change? It's a different story, but what can Imam al-Hussein do? He's stuck with people like you and me. But let us all thank our dear Imam for giving us this opportunity to be sitting in his majlis again. Tonight and tomorrow night, inshallah, these couple of nights that I'll be bothering you, inshallah, we'll be talking about some of the attitudes, some of the habits, some of the tendencies that we have that push us towards disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are habits and tendencies that the Quran has touched on a number of occasions. And inshallah, we'll try to include a story from the Quran as we go through each one of these tendencies and habits to see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains these issues. So tonight, what we want to start for tonight, inshallah, we're not going to be able to finish, but inshallah we'll finish in the following nights, is the tendency and the habit of reasoning and arguing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What do I mean by that? See, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a command clear to us. He says, when you wake up, you pray 2 rakats of salat. Doesn't get clearer than that. How am I supposed to pray the 2 rakats? You wake up, you do wudu, and then you say takbirat, you do this, you do that. You know exactly what he wants from you. Okay? Sometimes we start to reason and argue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His command is clear, but we say, you know what? I know what you're saying, but isn't it better if I do it like this? If I do it this way? So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you're beautiful. You have to observe hijab. Men and women. Men have their own hijab, women have their own hijab. You have to observe hijab. This is how I want you to observe hijab. Then we say, I know what you're talking about, but isn't it better if we do it this way? Like as if you understand more than he understands. You start getting smarter than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what we call reasoning with him. He's already thought about all this stuff. He knows all this stuff. But then you try to explain it to him as if he doesn't know. But listen, I live in a society where they don't even look at me if I don't dress like this. So it's okay here, right? This is what we call reasoning and arguing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we want to start this discussion from is this. When we talk about reasoning, where does this idea and concept of reasoning come into play? Where are we supposed to go back to our intellect and use our intellect to reason, to argue? And when does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us, listen, don't use your intellect here, use my command here? This is extremely important, and there are so many misunderstandings about this. Left and right, I hear it, brothers and sisters. Left and right, when you talk about hijab, when you talk about a number of other topics, people will say, but this doesn't make sense what you're saying. If it doesn't make sense, you have to go talk to him. Because this is what he's telling me. So we need to make this very clear. Where are we supposed to go back to our intellect and ask our intellect to reason and argue and ask questions? And when are we supposed to say, no, this is not your place. From this point on, you don't play that much of an important role. Okay, so this is what we want to make clear first. Recite the salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So there are two situations, there are two places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us clearly that you have to use your intellect. If you don't use your intellect, whatever you're doing in my name, I don't accept it. It is not going to be considered maqbool from my point of view. There are how many situations? Two situations. Anything other than that, you are not supposed to go to your intellect. So inshallah, tonight we're going to discuss the first of these situations where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, listen, if you don't use your intellect, it doesn't even count. It's not even maqbool from me. Okay. What is this first situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pushes us to use our intellect? When it comes to understanding and accepting the fundamental principles of Islam. The fundamental principles of Islam. What we refer to as usul ad-din. This is understood amongst our scholars. It's a unanimous type of thing. It's a matter of consensus amongst our scholars. That if someone sits there and says, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and I believe in the prophets. Why? Because Baba said so. It's unanimous that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment will hold this person responsible and accountable. Why? Because he didn't use his intellect. This is one of those situations where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to go back to your intellect. You have to accept it with your own intellect. If you don't accept it with your own mind, your own heart, your own intellect, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't really believe in Him. Recite a salawat. So this is the first situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pushing you and me. He's telling me, listen, if you have 1,000 questions about my existence, Bismillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a problem with that. Sometimes some of the youth say, excuse me, Maulana, that I'm asking this question. Please forgive me. Na'udhu billah, na'udhu billah. If God exists, then how come this is like this and this is like that? If you have a question, you have to find the answer to it. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. Take a look at the society that you live in. It's full of these questions. It's full of these questions. Our children, they grow up with these questions in their minds. And I will tell you this, some of them never find the answers to their questions. They never find their answers to their questions. That's why when we look in our communities today, unfortunately, when you look at the age of audience that you have, right? The child has grown into a Muslim community, maybe he's 5, 6 years old, right? He's fine, because at 5 or 6, he doesn't ask the tough questions, right? What is he asking? What is Allah? That's the question he asks. It's a simple question. What is Quran? What is this? Why do we wear black? These kind of questions. And then as you hit middle school, in high school, then you see that our youth are lost. Why? Because this young child who grew up in a great family, right? It's not like some weird family where the father was abusing him or anything. No, it wasn't like that. It's a good family. He was growing up in this Muslim community. He had good friends. But at that age, when he starts asking the tough questions and he doesn't find answers to them, that's when his ideology is starting to be undermined. And brothers and sisters, some of these questions cut so deep sometimes that they will undermine your faith altogether. Now, let me just explain what I mean by these questions sometimes, okay? Because sometimes people say, well, Maulana, alhamdulillah, I went through high school, I went through college, I went through these ages. I didn't deal with any of this. That's exactly what shaitan wants. Let me explain what shaitan wants here. Shaitan wants you to feel secure. He wants you to feel like you don't have any of these questions. You don't have any of these doubts. No, these doubts are for the bad people. You don't have any of these doubts. But when things get difficult, when things get very difficult, and you actually have to go back to your iman, you actually have to go back to your faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you push you through this difficult time, Then he will knock on your door and he'll say, wait a second, are you even sure he's out there? When things get difficult, that's when he comes, right? I mentioned this the other night. I said, Shaitan, he's been doing his job for how many years? For 1,000,000 years, right? Any of us, Brother Naqi here, sitting here, if he's been doing, like, you're still doing apps, right? Apps. If he's been doing apps for, like, 20 years, let's just say, because I see some gray hair, let's just say 20 years. He's been doing apps for 20 years, 25 years. At that point, you come to him, you're like, oh, I have a question about apps. He'll be like, just come here. He knows what he's doing, right? He's been doing it for 25 years. Shaitan has been doing his job for 1,400 years for Muslims at least. He knows how to do his job. He's not going to make it obvious to you and me. No, when things get very difficult and you need your iman to push you through these difficult times, that's when he comes to you and he says, if he's really out there, how come you've never seen a clear sign from him up until now? How many of us have struggled with a question like that? How come if he's really out there, there are so many people who don't believe in him? How come there are so many people who have doubts about him? He comes when things get difficult. Recite a salawat. All right. So the first situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to go to our intellect. Not only that, he says, if you don't go there, I won't accept it, is when it comes to understanding the fundamental principles of Islam. Brothers and sisters, when you have questions, when you have doubts, all of those questions and doubts, you bring it when we are discussing the fundamental principles of Islam. Why? Because once you pass those fundamental principles, there isn't going to be time for you to start asking questions. At that point, it's for you to start acting. Once you pass that level, you say, okay, what you're saying makes sense. I understand it. I accept it. From that point on, you have to start acting now. There's no more time for asking questions. Some of your questions, he will answer. Some of them. A lot of them, he won't answer. When you look at this issue of hijab, for example, how we know for our sisters, they have to cover their whole body except for their faces and their hands. Why is it like that? We live in a society, I don't need to talk about this society, you guys live it, you know better than me. We live in a society where women come with certain clothing and they go, and apparently nothing happens. Apparently there is no evil that happens. How come that my wife in the heat of San Antonio or Austin or Dallas or Houston, with the humidity that we have here, she has to dress like this? Well, some of these questions, we don't have answers for them. Yes, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a reason for them. But do we know the answer? A lot of times we don't know the answer. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you and me, these fundamental principles, bring every question that you have here. Let's sit down, let's talk about it all you want. But once we pass these, then don't sit there and say, why this, why that? Okay. Now that we have understood this, I want to talk about a very important verse of the Quran. This is probably one of the most misunderstood verses of the Quran. And it is in Ayatul Kursi. It's a very small phrase in Ayatul Kursi. Can anyone guess which phrase we're talking about? La ikraha fid-din. Ahsantum. La ikraha fid-din. This is a phrase that people refer to very often. And the understanding that people have of this phrase, or the reason why they refer to this phrase, is this, right? Someone is not praying, someone is not fasting. The mother and the father say, you should pray, you should fast. Then other people say, la ikraha fid-din. There's no compulsion in religion. What does that mean? You can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's not going to punish you just because you didn't bow down to him. That's usually the understanding that people have of la ikraha fid-din. You see a Christian say, it doesn't matter if you're Muslim or Christian, la ikraha fid-din. There is no compulsion in religion as long as you're a good person. Allama Tabatabai, he makes it very clear, and he explains a different understanding of this phrase. The understanding that Allama Tabatabai mentions of this phrase is exactly what we were talking about. He says, listen, La ikraha fid deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to explain this. When we say, do I have everyone's attention? Because this is a bit delicate, okay? When we say there is no compulsion in religion, he's talking about what we were just talking about. That if someone forces you to accept a certain religion and you haven't accepted it in your heart, that does not count. It is not maqbool. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you and me, La ikraha fid deen. Religion, believing in something, and someone forcing you to believe it, these two, they are not compatible. This is what La ikraha fid deen means. Not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't care about what you do. Of course He cares about. How come we have all these verses in the Quran? Khalidina fiha, khalidina fiha. If you do this, you go to hellfire. If you do that, you go to hellfire. So it matters for Him. Of course it matters for Him. No, La ikraha fid deen means, what he's trying to say there is that if someone forces you to accept a certain religion, if you follow a certain religion just because someone is forcing you, that does not count. You have to accept it with your own mind and your own intellect. Not that it doesn't matter for him. Let me mention this here. I don't think I got a chance to mention this here. Inshallah, with this, we'll bring the talk to an end. We had a very nice trip. This happened maybe just maybe less than a year ago. We had a trip with family. We were going to Mashhad, right? From Tehran, you go to Mashhad. So we had booked a train to go to Mashhad. And we went to Mashhad. On our way back, we were expecting to be seated somewhere else in the train, and then we ended up being seated somewhere else. Usually that's what happened in Eastern countries. You choose something else and you end up with something else. So we were seated somewhere else, and we were in the train, and obviously it's Iran, so no one's speaking English in the trains, obviously. So then this elder lady, I saw this elder lady sitting across from us. She was sitting there, and it was one of those trains where they were kind of like buses. You know how the seats are very close to each other, and you don't have secluded areas. Okay, it's like a bus. So everyone can hear what everyone is saying. So this lady was sitting across from us, and I got up for a second to get something, and she turned around to me in English, and she was like, "Can you get my purse?" I was like, okay, so first of all, how do you know I speak English? First, who are you talking to me? How do you know I speak English? That's first thing that crossed my mind. And then, how are you speaking English in Iran? There's two questions that crossed my mind. So I just try to be nice, especially if it's an elderly woman. So I grabbed the purse, I gave it to her. We continued, just minding our own business. We continued on this trip from Mashhad to Tehran. As we were continuing, all of a sudden, I see this lady, she's sitting, and there are 3 other elderly women with her. Those ladies were Iranian, okay? They were her friends. They started talking about basically the teachings of Islam, the different concepts that we have in Islam, the different holy places that we have in Islam. They're talking about all these different things, right? And the discussion comes to a point where she turns around and she says, "Yeah, I heard your holy place is this place called Mecca." And these elderly women were like, "Yeah, there's a place called Mecca." And then she said, "Oh, so what's so special about Mecca? What's so special about the Kaaba?" Okay, so what's special about the Mecca? What's special about the Kaaba? A million things are special about that, but in particular, Prophet Ibrahim, since the time of Prophet Ibrahim, it was there and all that stuff that we all know. What do you think these women replied in answer to this lady, whom I later found out was a Catholic Christian who was visiting Mashhad? I'll explain why at the end of the story. What do you think they responded? Some of the stuff they said was just so bad. Yes, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was creating the earth, He started from Mecca and then He created the rest of the earth. Yes, Mecca is special for us because there is some negative, positive things pulling Mecca this way or that way. Khob. I don't even know if that stuff is true. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. But is that why Mecca is important for us? That's not why Mecca is important for us. Khob. They continued. I wanted to say something. Just held my horses for a second. Said, let me see where else this discussion goes. Then she says, oh, so what is it about this Quran? I heard you guys have a book called the Quran. This is the answer, and this is why I brought up this story, because it relates to what we were talking about. This is the answer that truly, truly burns my heart. They sat there, and they said, yeah, you know how you guys have the Bible? And she was like, yeah, I know what the Bible is. She's like, okay, so you guys have the Bible, we have the Quran. They're the same thing. I say, Ya Allah, the Bible and the Quran, they're the same thing. And at that point, I had to intervene and explain a little bit about our religion because it was just getting very embarrassing. So I had to intervene. I was like, okay, listen, so I've studied a little bit. You can ask me some questions. And she was really happy about that. And the discussion went on. But the reason why I brought this up, brothers and sisters, this understanding that we have of La ikraha fid din. They have a book, they have a religion, we have a book, we have a religion. They're the same thing, we're all the same. No, we're not all the same. Sometimes even within the schools of thought within Islam, you have the Shia school of thought, you have the Sunni school of thought. Sometimes people who want to cause unity, you know what they do? You're all the same. No, we're not all the same. There are differences. Yes, you want to be united with someone else, that's fine. That's what being united means. It means you have differences, but you put those differences aside for a second because there is a common good. That's what being united means. Doesn't mean you're the same as that person. It doesn't mean that la ikraha fid din. Doesn't matter. You're Christian, you believe, you're a good person, that's fine. Allah will accept that. And I'm a Muslim, and Allah will accept that. And he's Buddhist, Allah will accept. No, this is not what la ikraha fid din means. We have verses of the Quran that وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. If someone goes and he knows the truth about Islam and he rejects Islam and he chooses another religion, that religion will not be accepted from him. So la ikraha fid din, and with this I will end inshallah. La ikraha fid din doesn't mean there's no compulsion in the sense that you can do whatever you want. No, it means that if you accept a religion, you have to accept it with your heart, not because someone is forcing you. This is the first situation, the first case where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says you have to use your intellect. If you don't use your intellect, we're going to have an issue. The second one, inshallah, we will talk about tomorrow night. Let us have a short musibah. If the brothers can dim the lights, we will have a short musibah for this caravan of Abu Abdullah, which is moving through the plains of Karbala as we speak. I'm sure that we have gone through the musibats of the ashab, the companions of Abu Abdullah through these nights. And we have had a chance to place ourselves in those situations, to place ourselves near the tents of Abu Abdullah, to understand what Abu Abdullah is going through. After Abu Abdullah goes to the battlefield and he fights, the traditions say that when he was going to the battlefield, he had to say goodbye to the ladies and the children. And this is one of the most difficult times for Abu Abdullah, as he has to stand there and speak to these women, and he has to speak to these small children who are gathering around him. The hadith says that when Abu Abdullah looked around and he saw that there was no one else, even Ali al-Asghar has been martyred at this point. Even Ali al-Asghar, he has held up in his hands and they have struck him with an arrow. His blood has poured all over the body of Abu Abdullah. He has taken this blood, he threw it up in the air, and the blood has not come down up until today. Even Ali al-Asghar is gone. Now Hussein has no one left for him. The hadith says, the tradition says, that Abu Abdullah looked around, he saw that 72 of his companions have been martyred. And from outside the tents, he started calling out the name of the women. And every single one of these women has pain in their hearts. So he starts out, he says, Ya Zainab, Ya Kulthum, Ya Sukayna. And he starts calling out the name of these women. And one of the daughters of Abu Abdullah starts asking this question from inside the tents. She says, Ya Abu Abdullah, oh my father, I can hear in your voice that you're getting ready to be killed. Is this true? And Hussein, you know what Hussein says? Hussein says, how can I not get ready when there's no one to defend us? How can I not get ready when we don't have any Nasir, we don't have any Mu'een, we have no one to defend us anymore? I have to go to the battlefield now. And it's as if Abu Abdullah enters these tents, and the narrations say that when some of the companions entered the tents to say goodbye to the women and the children, these children would gather around these companions. فَأَحَطْنَ بِهِ, they would gather around him. وَتَعَلَّقْنَ بِهِ, and they would start pulling on the clothes of Abu Abdullah, asking him not to go to the battlefield. A daughter of Abu Abdullah asks Imam al-Hussein, she says, "Irham ghurbatana." Have mercy, don't you see how lonely we are in the deserts of Karbala? Take us back to the city of Medina. Take us back to the city of our grandfather. And Hussein has to stand there and watch this with tears in his eyes. What can Hussein do in a situation like this? Abbas has gone, Ali al-Akbar has gone, Qasim has gone. Hussein has no one else. And it's as if Hussein turns to Zainab in these final moments. In these final moments, he turns to Zainab and he has a couple of wasiyats for Zainab. Ya Zainab, when I go to the battlefield, you will hear the horse coming back to you. When this horse comes back to you, this is a sign for you. This is for you to know that I'm not coming back anymore. Ya Zainab, when I go to the battlefield, I will come back into the middle every now and then. I will call out, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I will continue to call this so that the children will hear my voice, so that these children will have a little bit of hope left in their hearts. Ya Zainab, when I go to the battlefield and there's someone sitting on my chest and he has his knife out and he wants to get the job done, Ya Zainab, you have to have an eye on the children and on the tents, because they're going to set these tents on fire and these children will be running out of these tents in the plain of Karbala and they will have no shelter, they will have no refuge. Ya Zainab, when I go and I don't come back, you have to be patient. From this point on, through Kufa, through Sham, you are in charge of the caravan of Abu Abdullah. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ.